Hello and welcome to this reflection for the second week of Advent. And as we explore the traditional themes that are represented by the candles in an Advent wreath, we're going to focus together on God's love. To me, Advent is a season of reality. It roots our faith story in the real world. A world where things don't always work out the way we might have wanted them to. A world where we might often encounter uncertainty and fear and threat. A world that very much resembles the one in which we've all been living in recent months. And of course, one of the big narratives that's prevailed, particularly in recent weeks, is what about Christmas? How can we possibly celebrate Christmas with all of these restrictions and lockdowns? And yeah, perhaps we might be granted a window of opportunity when families can gather, but at what cost? Many are warning us of the potential outcomes of that. So it seems that either way, our options are going to be severely limited and things will be under something of a shadow this year. And I don't pretend for a minute that this will not be a challenging and difficult experience. But perhaps it also provides us with an opportunity to stop and ask what Christmas is really all about. You know, I sense that very often it's perceived as the gloss that we put on life once a year to help take our mind off some of the more challenging and troubling realities of life, at least for a few days, to be able to imagine a world where all is tinsel and glitter and happiness. And why not? You know, we're human, and without the capacity to imagine a better world, where on earth would we find any inspiration to work for that to become a reality? But if that's all that Christmas is, a sort of drop-down gloss to pull over all the troubles of life, then perhaps we are going to find it difficult. It's not going to be very easy, because those troubles are going to be very present within whatever celebrations we manage. But today, we're not talking about celebrations or distractions, even if they're well-intended and serve to help us dream of better. We're talking about love. And love, true love, is something that can overcome human circumstances, something that cannot be assailed by them, something that can endure even when things are difficult and tough. And our scriptures are full of references and descriptions of God's love. And I want to invite you to reflect for a few moments on one of those, which we discover in the Old Testament book of Lamentations. And that in itself is an interesting reality. Lamentations is hardly the most attractive title for a book, and if we read it, we discover that it very much lives up to its name. It's written by a prophet called Jeremiah, a particularly troubling and dangerous period in the life of his nation. A period when, as they looked to the horizon, all they could see was impending doom and destruction. And yes, as the title suggests, this is largely a book of lament. And the writer, Jeremiah, who is somewhat well known for his graphic and powerful imagery, certainly does not pull his punches. I'm going to share with you some verses from chapter 3. And that chapter alone is one in which he describes his situation as one of bitterness and hardship, feeling as though his bones had been broken, being weighed down with chains, feeling as though he's been mauled and mangled by a bear and a lion, having broken teeth, trampled in the dust, deprived of peace. Like I said, Jeremiah does not pull his punches. And yet, in the middle of this, we find one of the most hopeful and beautiful descriptions of God's love that we read in the Bible. And that's why I want to invite you to focus on that for a few moments. So this is what he says. If you want chapter and verse, it's Lamentations chapter 3, verses 22 to 24. This is what he says. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. The love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. They're incredible words. And they're written by someone who is not oblivious to what's going on around him. He's far from naive about what the future holds in store. And he's not afraid of telling it how it is. He opens this particular chapter with the words, "I am a man who has seen affliction." But he also knows that for all that may be going on, he is surrounded and enfolded by the love of God. And Jeremiah is very honest. He acknowledges that some of what his nation is enduring might well have its source in God. But that doesn't change things. This God is a God of love, a God whose love is unending, a God whose love can be encountered and experienced as each new day follows the last. And this season of Advent is one that serves to remind us of that reality. Prophets like Jeremiah did not say the things that people wanted to hear. They were honest and uncompromising in their appraisal of the present and their predictions of the future. And sometimes words of love, words that genuinely seek to be honest, can be difficult words to hear. Love doesn't just pamper to our expectations or speak empty words of comfort. They speak truth. Love speaks honestly, because love can do nothing else. The second candle of Advent, the candle of love, is also sometimes called the candle of the prophets. And I kind of like the fact that these two realities collide here, because the words of the prophets of the Old Testament were very often difficult words to hear. But they are words of love, because God is love, and God wanted his people to recognize reality and also to notice and to know that even if the consequences of their actions caused the inevitable harm and suffering that would come their way, this did not mean that they were not loved. God's love was unfailing. And whatever our experiences of yesterday or our fears for tomorrow, God's love for us is renewed every morning. And in Advent, of course, we also recall that sequence of events that led eventually to a young woman giving birth to a child in the streets of Bethlehem, a set of circumstances that were deeply challenging and troubling for those who were caught up in them, bullied by the Roman authorities to make a hazardous journey to Bethlehem, taxed into poverty, rejected by their family and left outside of the inn, alone and vulnerable in all the fears and pains of childbirth. And yet they endured. And they endured with faith and confidence and thanksgiving. Why? Because they knew that for all the struggles that they were facing, for all the uncertainties that events entailed, they were held fast in God's love. And what they were experiencing and becoming part of was the greatest revelation of God's love that the world has ever seen. God's love that is so vast and immeasurable that it can bring salvation to the whole of creation. And we will have our struggles, and this year of all years, those struggles will be particularly challenging and demanding. But we are loved by God. And whether we look at the example of Jeremiah as he confronted the impending destruction and dereliction of his homeland, or whether we look to Mary, Joseph and the infant Jesus in their harrowing and perilous journey to Bethlehem, we can learn to recognize that God's love can be made known even in the most difficult of circumstances. And so we light a flame of love, not to pretend that things are better than they actually are, but to be defined by something that is of far greater magnitude than any earthly circumstance: the love of God. We fix our eyes on that flame to remind us not to try to measure the love of God by the degree to which our present circumstances deliver what we expect or demand, but so that we might understand and embrace those circumstances in the light of the love that God has for us. A love that is beyond measure, a love that is unceasing, and a love that is constant and secure. A love that is ours to embrace and discover as each day follows the next. Whatever happens, whatever our journey entails, God's love is constant.